We spent no expense to get
Jim, it took me a long time to draw those blue lines in there.
Yeah, my camera's full. There's the moderator. Better for me than you. Okay, I got a signal. That'll get their attention. You got a good signal. You got it. You should take as far out that way. You guys see this much triangulation. No, with your camera. Just get just a slightly different angle here.
question cards. Get your question cards here.
This one's going to be set up. I'm not dropping frames.
I don't know whether it's operating. In case you're going to spy. You know, you make it. If you have something to
I couldn't move the bell to shoot. As soon as I realized it was you.
We have a limited amount of pins. So if you have a neighbor that has a pin and you can share it, that would be lovely. But if you're lonesome by yourself over here, we will give you a pin. Okay. Does anybody else really need a pin? See, now I'm embarrassing you, right? I didn't even do that. Okay. A card. I've been sort of only giving you one because you might be able to. You have a pen? Okay, good evening, and welcome to the City Council Candidates Forum, which is hosted by the good people at Ocean Colony Homeowners Association. My name is Jim Henderson. I'm at KHMB Radio, your hometown community radio station, and I'm very happy to have been asked to join you this evening. Now, the purpose of this is to get to know the candidates, obviously, and so we've passed out cards so that you can write your questions down. The format will be similar to the Women League of Voters, in which there will be a 2-minute opening statement by each candidate. And after that, we will be asking questions that you submit. So if you don't submit any questions, it's going to be a very short time that we'll have together. However, I do have some here, which I hope to be able to read because, you know, in my case, I forgot my glasses. So print big. You make up your cards, please. Okay. So, with that having been said, any other housekeeping things that I overlooked?
The answers will be 2 minutes each. Each candidate will have a chance to answer.
Yes, thank you for reminding me. That's right. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to the questions that are posed to them, and then we will have another question. I would ask this of the assembled multitude here of our fine candidates that are running for city council, and that is, you notice that there are no microphones here, all right? Campaigns are going to have to speak up. I don't know about you, but the older I get, I need people to talk up so I can hear what they're saying, okay? And nothing is more irritating. What? Exactly. So I would just encourage and ask and cajole you all to speak up so that we all can hear you. There's no particular order to the candidate's placement on the table before you. They just kind of came and sat down, so I don't know what that means, you know, but there they are, and they're lined up, which makes it easy for me because I can go right down the line, I guess, because there's no official pecking order here tonight in that sense. So since we're 6-7 minutes into our program, we will begin with the opening statements, and we'll start with this gentleman here.
I can ask a question procedural.
Sure.
Are you going to read out the question? You're going to read out the questions?
I'm going to read the questions that you submit. Loudly.
That's all right.
Okay. So, and thank you for asking that. So, with that having been said, the opening 2-minute statements will commence now.
Hi, I'm Harvey Rohrbeck, and I'm running for city council because I think it's time for a change. We really need a council that will listen to us, be responsive to us, not lie to us. We need a council that is fiscally conservative and spends our money wisely, none of which I'm afraid in the last 2 years we've experienced. Probably no, but that over 2 years before the council asked for citizen input on the Main Street Bridge, they already signed an over $1 million contract to destroy the bridge, not advertised, not make a big deal. That's the kind of stuff that really can't go on. Just yesterday, one of the incumbents said in the review that, said in the review that he was quote unquote with the voters about the measure gap. The reality is that he has a stealth website that he sponsored, but nobody else knew that it was his website to encourage people not to preserve the bridge. So we need openness, we need honesty, and that is what I will propose to do for the council. What we don't need is that like this, wasting money on our puff piece that the PR representatives just sent out. 15 seconds. On the front, we have this lovely picture of the library, which I'd love to talk more about. On the back, there's a $150 dinner that the chamber is sponsoring. This is the kind of wasted money that we can't afford.
Thank you. The one thing that I did not do, and I feel guilty, but you've already experienced it, is the timing device that we're using. This is our official timing device here. We spared no expense to bring this gentleman. So when you have spoken for 1 minute, you will see this card. When you have 15 seconds left, you will see this card. And when you see this, the cane is coming out. Okay. So, we continue.
Good evening. I'd like to say thank you to the Ocean Colony Homeowners Association for sponsoring tonight's event. It's a wonderful opportunity to speak to the voters. My name is Debbie Ruddick. I've lived in Half Moon Bay for approximately 25 years. I bought my first home here. I got married here and raised my 2 children in local public schools. I was on Half Moon Bay City Council previously from 1991 to 2003. I was mayor twice. You're probably wondering, why am I doing this again? I do share some concerns about some of the decisions the City Council has made. And I want to start by saying, nobody's perfect. I'm also perfect. I understand the context that the City Council is operating in from 2009 until the present. That said, I think some of the recent decisions, decisions in the last couple of years, are kind of emblematic of an approach to government that certainly doesn't suit me as a resident. I don't see a lot of embracing of public participation, listening. I see the City Council as kind of a club, if you will, that I feel that I and certainly other residents don't feel comfortable with. My priorities as elected would be to take back sidewalk liability. The city passed liability for sidewalks to residents without much notice a couple of years ago. I've implemented voter-approved Measure F, which was preserve our Main Street Bridge, at least until we move beyond the doubt that it can't be repaired. I would like to expedite repair of the Pilarcitos Creek Hernandez Bridge. And I'd like to do something a little different. I'd like to enhance neighborhood quality of life by actually preparing individual neighborhood plans. All of our neighborhoods are very different, have different needs. Currently, we just kind of take a general approach to the city. Let's get down to the neighborhood. I support business-friendly policies for Main Street, and I'd like to encourage new business opportunities so that people can work here. And I'd like to build only what we can afford to maintain and then do the upkeep that's required. And that goes for all of our public goods, including parks, trails, and open spaces. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Alan Alfano, and I was elected to the Half Moon Bay City Council in 2009, 5 years ago. And we've accomplished that. Now, this and other issues were created in our community years ago by different groups, one of them going by the name of LCP, League for Coastal Protection. And it really caused a major divide in our community. And one of my goals 5 years ago was to heal that divide, and I think we've accomplished that. We paid off the $18 million 20 years early, and we really helped put our community back on its feet financially. Among other things, we acquired the 29-acre Smith Field right down the highway ballpark, and we're working to dramatically improve these great youth facilities. We're on the path for a new coastside library, and I really want to hear later if there's anybody on the group who's opposed to this. It's been a dream for 15 years. We're going to make it a reality. Half Moon Bay has added a large number of senior facilities downtown, which I think you've all seen on Main Street. And our streets in town will all be fully paved in about the next year. I'm extremely happy to run in my record. I have no problem whatsoever anything I've done in the last 5 years. When I ran in 2009, I wanted to make sure Half Moon Bay didn't return to the ugly years that caused Beechwood and many other problems. And that's the reason I'm running again. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rick Kowalczyk. I'm running for City Council, running for re-election. I was elected originally in 2009. I served as your mayor in 2013. I've been a resident for about 15 years. My background is in business. I have an MBA from Dartmouth. I work in business at a cloud security company, and I spend my evenings, every one of them, working in the community, on the City Council, or other volunteer activities. I want to run for public office, I want to run for re-election because I believe it is important, a personal philosophy, to leave the community better than I found it. Worked hard to do that. When I ran the first time, a lot of people on the sidelines throwing stones, so people don't show up to election year. I think it's important to be engaged in the community. I'm committed to doing that, and I'm proud of my accomplishments, and I stand by my record. I want to finish what I started. We faced financial insolvency. This city became very close to bankruptcy. We turned it around. We are stable again. We're able to pursue community-serving projects for the first time in decades. I'm proud of that. That's a good move. I want to complete important community projects that we kicked off that were stalled, building a new library, renovating Maptutra Park, which is the main part of Providence City Hall. We're going to make it an open plaza. Building a new skate park for the kids, and collaborating with the groups in town, Boys and Girls Club, school district, and the county to make all these projects happen. Now, one of those projects is independent project. All of those projects are the result of collaboration with other groups that work together for the community. I also want to continue the positive momentum and introduce new things. One thing very important, I want to build a greater sense of community among all people in Half Bay, especially the Latino community. And I'm working hard to do that. And when my time isn't up, I will speak more about that. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Don Custos. I'm a 40-year resident of Half Bay. And I guess the first thing I'll do is answer the question, why am I here running? And throughout 40 years, I've had people asking, when am I running for city council? The reason is I taught school for a long time, and I taught economics and government and advanced government at the high school for 12th graders. And I have a passion for civic affairs and public policy. And my students started asking the same questions. Why don't you run for public office? And I said, you know, like I said, I've been here for 40 years. I've taught school. I've started, since 1989, I've had my own environmental consulting business. What I would like to see is, I used to go to a lot of city council meetings. I spoke out to get this hotel out here, all in the hopes of getting the tourists that were coming here to capitalize on them being here, meaning needing their money, and that money being put to uses for our benefit. And throughout the years, because of lawsuits, because of mismanagement, and so on, we haven't been able to have the money to do that. And I want to make sure now that we don't go back into the red, and secondly, that we can give back to the community the things that they need. Smithfield is terrible when you look at ball fields. I played in ball fields all around the Bay Area, and everyone has it better. Why can't we, us, have the same amenities that they do over the hill? And that's what I'm running, and I'll do my best. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Deborah Penrose. I have practiced medicine in downtown Half Moon Bay on Main Street for 22 years. Long time. Never been political except to vote, but never ran for political office. I started out as a fashion illustrator, and I joined the VISTA, which is the Domestic Peace Corps. Then I went to pre-med and medical school, then got married, had a couple kids, had a couple grandchildren. I'm in politics right now because I'm retired and I've got the time. That's the major reason. I've been asked to run because I think I am a voice of reason. One of the things that disturbs me more than anything else about our beautiful, beautiful Half Moon Bay is the fact that we are so polarized. I find that extremely disturbing. I think that if I can listen hard and use my voice of reason, I can get the 2 or 3 or 5 camps, whatever they are, to listen to each other and to reach a compromise. I don't think it should be that hard. They do it in other cities. Other cities prosper because of it. We need to prosper. I am very concerned about traffic congestion. It's one of the big issues that's on my plate. And I think that if we form a citizens task force, we can get the problem of traffic congestion improved. Maybe not solved, but improved. Shuttle buses, public school busing, crossing guards in most farms and pasturing. There are lots of ideas. I don't know what the answer is, but I do know if we involve everyone in the community, then our local people who are so talented can come up with some solutions that make sense for our city. So.
Pregnant pause. Is my voice going to work? It is. Good evening. My name is David Oblovi. As you can hear, I'm suffering through a gift from my children, so I beg your patience tonight. Perhaps I'll be done in a half hour or an hour instead of 2 hours. This was going to be pretty brief, but both the incumbents said something that I thought needed to be addressed. Most of you, or some of you may be aware that I jumped into this arena with the Main Street Bridge project almost exactly a year ago to the day. I had little or no political aspirations prior to that. I have little or no now, oddly. At any rate, the more I dug into the finances of the city, the structural things that were going on in the city, the more question marks that appeared over my head, and the more I said, wait a minute, this doesn't add up, okay? Councilman Alfano was kind enough to say that they were going to retire $18 million of bond debt 20 years early. The problem is, they're not. They're going to retire $12.5 million of the original $18 million of bond debt 15 years early because of an insurance payment, not because of anything the council did. It was an insurance payment from AVA. Again, it's a minor point, but it's an important point. Councilman Kowalczyk was very happy with the financial recovery of the city. What he fails to mention is, and I'll go into this more later, this is a lot to fit into this short segment, but what he failed to mention was the city booked the Glen Cree property, which was a gift to the city in 2010, at $9 million of revenue and put it into the general fund. Today, when you look at the general fund has a balance of roughly 17 to $18 million. Half of that is the Glen Cree property. You can't pay a bill with the Glen Cree property. You can't pay down the library $4 million down payment with the Glen Cree property. It wasn't revenue and it shouldn't have been revenue. So the financial recovery is an unknown. It's part myth and part fabrication. And let's have some fun tonight. Thank you.
Thank you all. I have cards coming in, and it looks like they're very broad brush. I mean, there's many. It's not like I have 5 on this subject, 3 on that subject, they're kind of all over. So I will do my very best to try to sort through these and give everybody categories of. But what I'd also like to do is stay away from your comments.
I have my doctor here.
Oh, okay. So what I like,
or not.
And it's just keep on going. So what I like to do to rotate it a little bit so it doesn't get, just the same people doing it all the time. And I can't pick out people and go number 3, now number 7, but what I'd like to do is start with you, and we'll go down here with the next question, and then after a couple of questions, I'll rotate it back so that, people are in different positions of addressing a particular subject. So, this question has come in. It says, do you support the shifting of liability to property owners for our sidewalks? So we'll start with you, sir, and we'll work our way back.
And we have 2 minutes, correct? Okay. The short answer is no, and it's a very simple principle. The city has farmed out at this point. We don't have emergency services. We don't have a public works department. Well, we have a public works supervisor, but we don't have a public works department. We don't have a planning department. We've contracted it out. We've contracted out our Parks and Recreation department at this point. And how many of you, just show of hands, how many have sidewalks in front of their homes? Okay, so you're all screwed. The people that don't have sidewalks, good for you, because you don't have the liability. So what the city council did was, in addition to farming out every other possible responsibility they could come up with, they said, okay, we're going to put liability for sidewalks onto the homeowners that have sidewalks in front of their homes. And then to make it even more amusing, you have to get a permit before you can do work on the sidewalk. Now, I think they're working on that to what's worth. And to add insult to injury, finally, heritage trees. If you have a heritage tree that's causing the damage to the sidewalk, well, there you go. The city, if we're going to have a city, folks, the city is supposed to provide us with services, right? So we need to ask ourselves as a community, what services are we willing to accept from the city? And simple answer, very simple question. No, the city is responsible for maintaining sidewalks. Or let's just have homeowners maintain out to the middle of the road too. Technically you own out to the middle of the road, right? So let's just give it, you need to maintain your section of road. It's ludicrous. There was a judgment, I'm sure it's going to be brought up, $350,000, actually the judgment wasn't $350,000. A homeowner in Casa del Mar was sued for $350,000 because a lady tripped on her sidewalk. The insurance company settled it for $100,000, but there's another one. You people that have sidewalks are likely going to be paying higher insurance premiums someday, if you're not already, for the added liability of the sidewalks.
Yeah, I don't have a lot more to say than what David just said, other than that I think if you really look at maybe not the group in here, maybe the group in here, but there are a lot of aging people, and there are a lot of people that have lived here for 50 years, 60 years, in houses that are falling down, and their sidewalks can be in terrible repair. They can't afford it. They got their first home, it's an old home, the sidewalks are a mess, they can't afford it. Liability should be the city's job.
Yes, I see some of you have the Happy May review, and what I put in there I stand by. I come from the East originally. I believe that I don't see any difference between a road and a sidewalk. We have sidewalks for particular purposes which benefits us all. And so if we are a community, the community should take liability for those sidewalks and repair them when necessary, just like they do for roads. That's my theoretical and philosophical where I come from, in my mind. I talked to an attorney last night, I talked to other people. To get to that point would be a little difficult to do so, but I would like to see that. I believe it's a public good, and public good should be provided by definition, Adam Smith, by government.
Aren't we fortunate that we can talk about the possibility of taking back sidewalks? You know, in 2011, we didn't have that possibility. There was no option. We touched the bone. We had to do all kinds of things in the city to save money. We contracted for our Parks and Rec with the city of St. Carlos. We contracted with the county for law enforcement. We reduced staff. This was not, it's easy to say when we're on a positive financial track that, oh, we should take back this liability. You know, we didn't have that option. This was the option. This ordinance that was enacted was not a new ordinance. It was merely a clarification of a California law from 1911. Most cities in California have property owners responsible for their sidewalks, except for a few wealthy communities, Palo Alto being one of them. Aside from that, by and large, residences, landowners are responsible for their sidewalks. That being said, the conditions today are different than the conditions 4 years ago. We're healthier, and I think we need to collaborate and work with our residents to find a solution that works with our community. So I'm definitely interested and open to looking at how we can do this. We are responsible. I think as a city, we should share responsibility. We should have safe pathways. We should, a person with disability should not have to worry about falling sidewalks. Perhaps we can contribute with monitoring. Perhaps we can organize group purchasing and help make it affordable. But we need to work with our community to find the right solution for today. The right solution in 2011 was to save the city.
The comments Rick made are really correct. When we were in the midst of almost close to bankruptcy, and we were running in the red, we had to cut many things out. And really what we did with sidewalks is we simply clarified what the state has said since 1911. The sidewalk belongs to the property owner. And we further went on to say that if something happens, if you have a bad sidewalk and somebody falls, your insurance needs to cover that. Now, since that time, things have gotten better financially. One of the goals we wanted to do in this community was to repave all of our streets. And we have some really bad streets in our community, major potholes. And we are now on course to repair almost all the streets within the next, like I say, year or so. If we want to keep these two items separate, there's maintenance of sidewalk, which is traditionally in the state and the responsibility of the property owner, and there's liability. They kind of go hand in hand. If your sidewalk's in good shape and somebody trips, but there's no trip hazard, they're not going to win a case because there's nothing to trip on. If your sidewalk's got cracks and you haven't taken care of it and they fall, you're going to have a problem with liability. As we finish these other projects, we need to put a cost on maintenance if the city wants to, the citizens want us to participate. We need to put a cost on picking up liability. Could we do it? Certainly, but nothing, there's no free lunch. If this is something our city wants to do, our community wants to do, we have to talk about it, put a price on it, and add it to the budget. It's not free.
I agree with some of the earlier speakers who said that they oppose the city foisting liability, sidewalk liability, and street tree liability onto homeowners. And I think the city council handled this very badly. It was adopted, it was introduced at one meeting and adopted at the second meeting with very little public notice. If you look what other cities have done regarding sidewalks, you know, notices and bills, public workshops, this is a very controversial issue. This could cost individual homeowners hundreds of thousands of dollars, loss of insurance, ultimately the loss of their home. One of the residents who had a claim, her annual insurance premium went up approximately $1,000. So yes, it's a public good. The city has infrastructure and legal expertise and capacity for lawsuits that individuals do not have. And I want to point out here that Mayseers, Alfano, and Kowalczyk made the motion to introduce this ordinance and to second it.
I agree with Councilmember Alfano that there is a distinction to be made between maintenance and liability, and a lot of people are confusing the two. California law says that maintenance of the sidewalk or the trees is the responsibility of the homeowner. But it doesn't require that if the homeowner gets sued because he has a half-inch, three-quarter-inch gap in the sidewalk, that doesn't have to be the responsibility of the homeowner to deal with that suit. The city is much better equipped to defend those kinds of suits. And one of my first priorities, if I'm elected, is to repeal that law that foists not responsibility, but liability for the sidewalks and trees, so that the city assumes liability. In terms of maintenance, I think we can do a better job of coordinating. So, for example, if there's a bunch of houses on a street that all need work on a sidewalk, the city might use its scale to be able to fix that and charge the homeowners less than if they went out one by one. The liability should be taken back and be the responsibility of the city.
Okay, in trying to be fair to everyone, we're probably not going to be able to have all your questions. And some of these are very relatively, well, maybe simple questions, but I don't want to eat up 2 minutes of time for everybody to say the same thing. But to be fair, one question here is, and this might be better for our incumbents, is there a date for the construction of the library? I mean, that's dependent on so many variables. Can we, you want to say quickly? You want to say something? Now 2 minutes.
If Measure O passes, we will start library project in 2015 with the construction documents. After construction documents are complete, the library building itself will take 18 to 24 months to construct. While it's being constructed, we will put up a temporary library structure.
And remember, you're on the record. Everybody's on the record here tonight. Now, this one I'm going to take a little liberty with, and I'm going to modify it. The question originally reads this: in consideration of the candidates' backgrounds, does anyone have any criminal or civil charges that the community should be aware of? Okay. Now, I was named in a SLAPP suit, which later went away. So if we're saying, was I ever named in a complaint? Yes, guilty as charged. Was I ever convicted of any crime? No, I was not. See the difference there? So I'm going to rephrase the question and let anybody answer it, that if indeed there is anybody here that would be applicable to. In consideration of the candidates' backgrounds, has anybody been convicted of a criminal or civil charge that the community should be aware of?
No.
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 Okay. Well, we got rid of those, didn't we? Okay, this is to all candidates here. It says, how would you, and we'll start to go back this way this time. How would you fast track solving the Kehoe ditch problem so that the residents next to the ditch can feel safe from flooding and further erosion of their properties?
Kehoe ditch has been a contentious issue. It doesn't have to be. The neighbors are very upset because the erosion in their backyard is terrible and they don't have enough room. And the solution that the city illegally implemented of clearing out the ditch, that's clearly not the way to go. So there is a solution, and it's not tremendously expensive, but it will satisfy everybody. And that is to reroute the water course, calling it ditch majority, reroute that drainage down a half a lot's worth of the erosion with the habitat. So that's what I would.
So I work for the California Coastal Conservancy. So we're a grant-making agency. We spend money building the coastal trail, islands, urban space protection, preserving agriculture, etc. We also do a lot of watershed work. And we've given grants to communities to reroute water courses, both to improve wildlife and plant habitat, but also to increase, water retention in the ground, to recharge groundwater, and to clean water as well. So there are grants available for that. And the water bond that's on the ballot in November, Proposition 1, has several hundred millions of dollars available for that sort of watershed work. So I think the city needs to position itself to apply for grants when the money becomes available to do this work. There's public land right next door to which they could reroute this channel. And it would probably go into the creek, so there'd be some regulatory and permitting issues. But it's eminently doable, has been done.
The Kehoe ditch problem has been studied for many years, and many of the councils that paid for these studies never followed through, sadly. And when the city went down into the Kehoe ditch and tried to do normal maintenance, they got sued by one of the neighbors towards the end because it turned out, unknown to the city, that some of the people that came there, the CCC, brought weed whackers and chainsaws to clean out the city lost this lawsuit from a homeowner at the end of the Kehoe ditch. And it's made it way more difficult trying to resolve this issue. I've walked through the neighborhoods with the homeowners, one of them's here tonight, and it's a serious problem. And our hands have been tied to some degree because of the fear of these kinds of lawsuits. Now, the meandering stream concept is one that's been put out by the individual that sued us. We have no idea what the cost of that's going to be. It could be millions of dollars. And talking about grants and so forth is wonderful, but we have no guarantees we're going to have it. And if and when rains come, serious rains, the people that back up to Kehoe ditch are going to have really serious problems again. So on our council agenda, on the next meeting, next week, we have an agenda item to hire a firm to study and come up with a solution for the Kehoe ditch. I can't tell you what it's going to end up being, but one thing I can tell you, once we have a solution that we feel is justifiable and proper, we're not going to be get backed off by people threatening litigation. We're going to find a solution, and we're going to implement that solution.
I enthusiastically support a quick project to remedy the situation in the Kehoe ditch. The city funded maintenance of all the ditches in the city except one. We had to pull one out of our maintenance plan, the Kehoe ditch, because of the threat of lawsuit. If we stopped them all because of that lawsuit, then none of these drainage ditches would have been maintained. So we were forced to pull that one out. We were forced to not maintain it currently. So we are maintaining every other waterway and ditch in the community. For the Kehoe ditch, I would support going through the ditch and cleaning it up so water can flow through, but it is a serious concern to the residents along there. If you're not familiar with this, what's happening is the backyards that come up against the ditch are sort of falling into it. It's slowly degrading, and so they're losing their property to the ditch. I support an engineered solution. Next city council meeting, we're going to bring on, we're going to look at bringing on an engineer to study this and bring on to develop a solution that we can implement that's right for our community. I want to work with the residents and get their support for this. You throw out quick numbers, it's just $1 million. I sit on the sewer authority board. No one's approached us about buying our land to reroute a water course for it. So it's fanciful. It is not $1 million. We could look at it, but I don't think this group should come up with, make sure it works for the residents, and we should wholeheartedly embrace it and implement it as fast as possible.
Okay, I'm aware of the lawsuit. I'm also aware of the erosion problem. I'm also aware that there are residents there who didn't agree with the lawsuit. They don't want to lose their backyards and homes. It seems to me, and I guess you're going to need an engineer, but I thought I heard down someone mention that we should reroute the stream rather. If we can't clean it up, how can we reroute it? That's kind of a serious fix, if that's what they're saying. So I don't really have a solution. I think an engineer is going to have to look at it, look at state law, and find out what the state really wants, and try to protect it. But $1 million is a lot of money to just throw out there to reroute the street. Then we don't know if we can or not do.
I agree with what a couple of the council members have said. The answer is going to be an engineering answer. I would only hope that instead of outsourcing over the hill, that we look around our community, especially around the community in Kehoe Ditch, and find engineers that are local to solve the problem, to come up with a solution to the problem. That's all.
I want to clarify a couple things about the Kehoe ditch, if I could. The council repeatedly said weed whackers and hand tools. The invoices for the Kehoe ditch, the work that was done by the city council, amounted to more than 1,000 man-hours of work. Okay, give me 1,000 hours in a weed whacker, and there won't be a blade of grass left in this town. So let's stop seeing this as a couple of guys out there with machetes or whatever. This was a denuding of the ditch. It wasn't a threatened litigation. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a trial. The city, and by extension the council, got their butts whipped and a $1.5 million penalty, fine. Okay? Let's go to the December 4th, 2013 City Council meeting this past December and watch these two gentlemen and the other three on the City Council as they lambast Mr. Benjamin for having the unmitigated temerity to sue the city, win, and then ask the city to abide by the terms that the judge laid forth. Any solution obviously needs to be engineered. That kind of goes without saying. But before we can come up with a solution, we have to start working on this as a community and not seeing Mr. Benjamin, who I have no ties to one way or the other, as the arch enemy of the council who must be defied at all costs. The way we solve this is by including Mr. Benjamin in the process. We're about to spend $45,000 on yet another consultant in addition to over $150,000 we've already spent, in addition to a $1.5 million payout. So this is ludicrous. Seriously ludicrous. Thank you.
We're having fun? Okay. The answer is certainly we are. You know, my role is subjective, to say the least. And there are questions that take on a different flavor than other questions. And it has been suggested to me that maybe some questions merit only a minute response. And I'll take that one step further. And this next question, I'm going to ask you if there's something you really want to address, because I don't want to have everybody saying the same thing in a mantra-like fashion as we go down the line. This would be a 1-minute answer if you wish to accept it. And I know that if one does, everybody would have to join in. Anyway, the question is, and it's hard to do this with a straight face, is there anything the city can do to improve the traffic situation on 92, especially in October? Survey said? Anybody want to deal with that, or you do? Well, you just opened up the box, now the law want to take it.
Yeah, I think it would be a very inexpensive solution to crossing guards at Emos, Farms, and Pastorinos. It's not going to solve the problem, but it will mitigate it up.
Anybody else want to chime in?
Sorry. Don, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
We've been talking to the county about this. This is county property. And, you know, God bless all the businesses there around Limos, but it really doesn't make us end up being trapped in town or in our house when the traffic starts. So the solution is really going to be one or two things, maybe a combination. One may be widening the highway to allow right turn lanes for these businesses to be there and still let through traffic go through. The other one may be, and this has been talked about, maybe trying to find other areas for these businesses to establish what they do, which they're very successful at, in the area where the traffic can handle it and may not be in that area.
I'd like to address it.
Sure. 1-minute response.
So the land, at least when I was on the city council, was zoned for agriculture. And over time, the county, at the request of the farmers along the highway, added more, or grandfathered more and more uses under that agricultural zoning. You know, without much public input, you know, the farmers go to the county say, sure, why not? So the public hasn't really had a lot of chance to weigh in on the program on Highway 92. In fact, it got so bad early in the 2000s that they actually had an elephant out there on the property giving elephant rides. So, you know, what really has to happen is that there's an adult conversation about the zoning of the property, and perhaps, you know, moving those sorts of activities to maybe one giant location where people can access it and visit different businesses. So the solution, I think, is taking a good look at the zoning and the uses and, you know, getting tough about it.
I think Alan mentioned it, it's not a Talbot County. And I wanted to mention, we did have police out there a couple of times at the pumpkin festival. And it doesn't seem, you have so many people coming over at once. Unless you put 4 lanes, which is never going anywhere, and turnout lanes, we're going to live with what we have. Okay, we can only influence the county so much. There's no easy solution. It's a yes. Echo with everybody.
A quick response, if I may. So there are crossing guards. They're only at the most busy times. And perhaps crossing guards would be helpful at other times as well. The businesses there on N2 permits come up periodically, and those are up for review. And we have a strong collaborative partnership with the county, with Don Horsley, our supervisor. And I think we need to give feedback to Don about traffic here. But not just from these businesses. I support businesses, but even in off-peak times, traffic is very heavy there. And so we do need to look at traffic mitigation on 92 and Highway 1. We want the county for a solution. And we can't do it independently, it's a chain. If we change something, the county doesn't change it, it all is connected. So we have to work together. And perhaps the turnout lanes and some other solutions will be helpful. But it's not just a solve, it's other things to do as well.
Okay, everybody satisfied that they had a chance to comment? I'm going to combine 2 of these. It deals with Measure O, or something that was brought up earlier. It's a 2-part question. back to obviously 2 minutes on this one. And we'll start at the end of the table and work our way back. The gentleman that I don't want to get too close to, with all due respect. I know. Just teasing. What is your position on the sales tax? And will Measure O fund the Pillicitos Bridge, fund the library, or promote new businesses and other projects? And who is responsible for fixing the Pillicitos Bridge?
Wow, 2 minutes. Yeah, the bridge, the question is, can it fund it? It's fine.
Okay, well, you know what? If you want to do it that way, we'll make it a yes or no thing. Either support it or you're done. Because I don't know if we want to do 4 minutes just to that.
No, not going to.
But on the other hand, I bounce you. You want 4 minutes on this one?
It's very important.
Okay, 4 minutes. Okay, on this one. 2 minutes on the first question, 2 minutes on the second one, because this is your program.
Democracy at work.
Okay. No, let's go with first. What is your position on the sales tax? You, sir.
A couple facts about Measure O that we need to address. Measure O is a continuation of, I'm not going to get Measure J, I believe. Historically, that generates $800,000 of revenue a year, which nets to $2.4 million. So what we're talking about is $2.4 million that we would have to spend. The library are budgeted, and in big capital letters, the council and certain opponents on it are saying Measure O is going to substantially fund the new library. This is in capital letters, okay? The consultant that did the city's report for them does not argue or even suggest that Measure O could fund the new library, given that our share is going to be around $12 million. What they say is, if you get a bond issue, two things actually, if you get a $4 million down payment, and you get a bond issue, whether these revenue bonds or general bonds, then you can use Measure O to pay down the debt for the 3 years that it exists. Because Measure O will be about $800,000 a year, the debt on the bonds will be about $1 million a year, plus or minus. So it'll help, sure. Measure O is not going to buy us a new library in any universe that we all live in. Okay? And further, I'm going to address this to the two candidates. I'd like them to address the $4 million that their own plan says they're required to produce in order for either funding option to work. So I would really like them to address that because they haven't addressed it, and perhaps there is something there that I'm just not seeing. So Measure O is a continuation of the tax that is also now going to pay for Smithfield improvements. So there's $2.4 million. The new library debt, which again, it won't pay for, but it'll get close. Smithfield improvements, $300,000 to $500,000 for the Pillicitos Creek pedestrian bridge, and about 3 other things. I don't want to sound like George Bush, but the math doesn't add up. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with David. No on O. It's regressive. It discourages businesses from coming into our town. We haven't earmarked the money in a way that makes any sense. Who's to say after we pass Measure O where that money actually goes? Nobody knows. We talk about maybe we'll put some money into the Pillicitos Bridge. That's a state park. It's not our problem. Maybe we should be putting money into that bridge, and I think we do need to fix it. I don't know that Measure O is the way to go with it, though. If we earmarked it all for Pillicitos Bridge and really fixed Pillars, I'd say yay, because that's a priority as far as I'm concerned. But I don't know that Measure O is the way to do it.
I'm generally against raising taxes to begin with. That's why I begin. I'm on the record by saying that I would go along with Measure O for, I believe, for the next term. But after that, I would be opposed to it to all taxes unless it's dedicated. If they're going to say we're going to use this for the library, then all that money is going to go to the library. And I think that, and if the public wants to spend their money, this is democracy. And at this level of government, it is really important. We can affect what we want here. If we want to raise the taxes upon ourselves, for something for ourselves, that is democracy at its best. So if we want to raise it again and make it 2% for a particular purpose, a library, or a bridge, or whatever, and the public wanted it, I would support it. But after this time, I'll be opposed to it unless it's a dedicated tax. By the way, I believe in dedicated taxes as a management tool for the overall budget. That's too complicated to talk about now, but I think it's a good tool, knowing that we need to have some general money in the general fund to give the council flexibility. I want to make that point really clear. That's an important thing for me.
Measure O will keep the sales tax what it is currently for 3 years, and then it will sunset. And I would agree, when it sunsets, I'd be very reluctant to continue another sales tax. This sales tax is the only mechanism we have for tourists who fill our community on the weekends to help share in the burden to finance our community. There's no other mechanism for all the tourism to help fund this community. If you support the library, you need to support Measure O. If you are against the library, you're against Measure O, you're against the library. I see no library, no library, no library, no library, no library.
Library!
So I'm pro the library because this project will happen with the passage of Measure O. We will kick it off next year.
How are you
We
going to
have to pass by 50% of the vote plus one, and we're poised to do it. I'm happy to address separately how we'll pay for it. I think there's a total lack of understanding basic finance by some of the candidates, and that is clouding some of the discussion.
Let's say it again, Measure O is not a tax increase. Measure J moved the sales tax up half a penny. If you spend $1,000 in town, not groceries, not prescriptions, it costs you $5 more. The tourists are helping us pay for all the infrastructure things that we have to do in our community, like we talked about, streets. This is really interesting. I talked to many of the business owners in town, and I think you probably know a few of these names. Becky, Gourmet Appliances, Charles Nelson, Tote Blanche, Sprocket Kids, Paul and Julie Shaken, Sam's. Okay, you know these places? They back Measure O. They have no problem with it. They want a library. They want the city to keep improving. And basically we take reserve money a few years from now. We're hoping to put $4 million together. Our portion of the library, half, the county picks up half. $22 million, we pick up 11. We get our hands on 4. We need to borrow 7. Now keep in mind that Measure O, or Measure J, was getting well over $1 million a year. We'll probably get closer to $1.5 million with Measure O. And yes, we can take pieces of O. The Pillar Cedars Bridge is something we committed to as a council, $300,000. The funds are there. Keep in mind, what happens in 2019? We've paid the bonds off. We pick up $1 million a year. That helps us pay off the rest of the library. We don't have to do a property tax. We don't have to do a parcel tax. We use Measure O and the bond payoff to finish off a $22 million library.
So I don't think the city council has made the case for Measure O. Measure J, which increased the sales tax to the highest in Northern California, I believe, was predicated on a financial emergency, probably a real financial emergency. So you have the council talking about our rosy financial picture. You know, we're in full recovery mode. We're talking about big ticket capital projects. I just don't see the justification at this point. They're using the language as, you know, of an emergency to sell it to the voters. But as you've heard them say, the city appears to be flush with funds. I think if we really wanted to help our local businesses, we would ease up on the sales taxes, and perhaps it would result in more people shopping locally. I think we want more shopping locally, and we want to help our businesses. Alternatively, if you keep the sales tax, why not take that revenue and plow it back into improvements that actually help the local businesses and help, you know, people shop locally. So I would rather see sales tax, you know, revenue go toward helping businesses as opposed to something for which there's no nexus yet in the library. That said, I support library improvements, however, at a scale that's appropriate for the neighborhood. And I think the public needs a chance to understand the trade-offs of financing and to weigh in on a choice of Measure O fails, a lease revenue comes, which means the interest goes out of the general fund and the residents don't get a chance to vote on it. They're trying to avoid having the public vote on these capital projects. So I really am opposed to their approach to the whole matter, and I'm definitely going to vote no on Measure O because I think that will be the case. Let's instead help our businesses.
I have some general arguments against Measure O and then specific arguments about the library. Firstly, sales taxes are regressive. That means it affects poor people more than rich people. So I think that's a bad idea. Secondly, Measure J, as Debbie just told you, was enacted as an emergency measure. Now the emergency is over, so you shouldn't know that. Thirdly, if you look around the city, you'll see some no and O signs that are sponsored by businesses. And that's because it would probably be counterproductive to our Main Street merchants, and they don't like it either. But I want to address the more general question that I'm against the library because I'm against Measure O. That's nonsense. I'm a member of the Friends of the Library. I think we need a new library. I don't think we need the kind of library that this picture is. If you want to check on what can happen when you have unchecked growth of library concepts, check out the Mitchell Park Library in Palo Alto, which went millions of dollars over budget and many years late. The same firm that was part of that effort is the architectural firm that had up to now designed the library. The way to do it, as Debbie said, is to float a general obligation bond, which requires 2/3 majority. We need to educate the people. If they're willing to support the library, they should be willing to pay for the bond. And that's the honest way to support it. This nonsense about $1 million a year for Measure O is to build a $10 or $15 million library. This doesn't add up.
Okay, as agreed, this is a two-parter, so we'll start down here. And this is your second question that you will be commenting on. Measure O, library, or promote new businesses and other projects, and who is responsible for the Pilositos Bridge?
Take the last question first. The state is responsible for the Pilositos Bridge. Legally, apparently some bridge trolls, however, felt that they were responsible for it as well. And I think that goes to a big point in our community is what are we going to own and what are we going to allow others, consultants, contractors, the state, how much are we willing to give away of control of our own infrastructure and resources. To go to how Measure O is going to pay for that, first I'd like to note that other than impugning my abilities, Mr. Kowalczyk didn't address the $4 million question. Mr. Alfano mentioned it, didn't really address it either. Measure O isn't going to pay for the new bridge because the state is not going to allow us to do so. It's a capital improvement on the state's part. And so functionally, this is an intractable problem and this sucks. There's no simple solution. I've spent a lot of time working with Jerry and the engineer, Larry Jones for Bueller & Bueller, who was the state's primary principal engineer. They did the principal engineering report. We could put together a solution that would work in the short term. It's not going to happen before the end of the year, most likely, and it's going to cost you $300,000. What are you going to do? We have a problem. And this is a problem that we see in our infrastructure, whether it's the state or the city. We build stuff, a new library, we don't maintain it. The Main Street Bridge, why is it in need of repair? Because we haven't spent a single dollar on it in 55 years. Literally, not a dollar. Same thing with this bridge. So I wish I had an easy, here's how I would fix the answer, although how I would fix it is exactly how someone did fix it, which is go out, crib it, figure out the span over the creek, and call it done. Unfortunately, with liability being what it is in today's world, that's not a realistic solution. So.
Yeah, I don't know that I can add anything to what David said. It's the state's bailiwick. Whether we could convince the state that we want to be involved in it, I don't know. I do know that at a recent city council meeting, when a local environmental engineer stood up and said, I'd be willing to do the environmental impact report for free, she was ignored. And actually, the attorney said, oh, I don't think the state would allow that.
She actually has been working with the state engineer and me through the back channel, not going through the city.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just talking about how the city council responded to her. And that was very upsetting to me because we do have local talent here. All of us want the Pillar Cetus Creek Bridge fixed. It's incredibly important for our students. It's incredibly important for our tourists. It's incredibly important for the people that commute along it. It's got to be fixed. I don't know what the solution is, but I think working with the state is what we need to do.
Yes, I'm not sure I answered the first part of the question. The second part of the question is the responsibility for the bridge. Pilsner's Bridge is the state. I thought he said is Measure Road going to pay for that bridge and the library and something else. The answer is no. No, it's not going to do that. Measure Road cannot pay for all those things, if that was the question. Impossible. I have nothing else to say about it.
Just backtracking a bit, changing the plan for the library is stopping the library. We had a plan for the library in 2003, and we didn't we changed the plan. We don't have a new library. Changing the plan stops the library. I want the new library now for this community. That's what people want. Regarding the Pillar Cetus Bridge, Pillar Cetus Bridge is a bridge on the coastal trail. It's over Pillar Cetus Creek. It is in terrible disrepair. It was damaged by California State Parks workers. And it's not repairable. So we worked with our friends in Sacramento, with Senator Rich Gordon and Senator Jerry Hill, to get state parks to come to the table and collaborate with us. We can't develop a solution on something we don't own without collaboration. We have very strong relationships with our friends in Sacramento, and we were able to have meetings with California State Parks. They are without some management right now, but we're able to get them to the table. They were very focused on a long-term solution, which will take 3 to 4 years. This bridge serves our community, economic interests, safety interests. Our kids use it, people use it to go to work. So at a recent city council meeting, the city council said they would reorganize budgets. If Measure O passes, we will have the flexibility to reorganize budgets to put $300,000 toward a short-term fix. Rather than wait 4 years for a long-term fix, we have the ability with Measure O to move budgets around and make it work for a short-term fix, estimated roughly 6 months. Still too long, but a heck of a lot better than 4 years.
If Measure J was bringing in well over $1 million a year, and the way things are improving in the economy, we get up closer to $1.5 million. Do the math, $1.5 million times 3, we're at $4.5 million. If we put $2.5 million towards the library, plus some reserve funds, we borrow the difference. In 2019, we hit the $1 million a year, the bonds are paid off, that pays off whatever we had to borrow. And we don't have to go to the voters for a 2/3 bond issue. If you really want the library, you're going to follow the path the council has set that's doable. The community passed J 55-45. We did virtually no campaign. We're doing a little bit this time, but all the merchants, and I'm sorry, I don't know who Mr. Rohrbeck is talking to. I'm part of a business on Main Street. The sales tax doesn't hurt us. It doesn't hurt anybody else. It hasn't cost one job. It hasn't stopped anybody from shopping in any store in town. You can prove me different, I'd be happy to hear that. But just think for a minute here. There's a real difference in approach here, and it's about getting things done. The Pillar Cetus Bridge is broken. You want to wait 4 years for the state to fix it? We said, no, we'll take 300 out of Measure O and pass it. We'll put that forward to do an engineered plan to repair the bridge. Do you want things to happen? Do you want to get things done? This council does. I'm afraid if you go with other directions, you're going to see things stop. It's just as clear as can be.
Jim, could you repeat the question? You kind of lost it.
I knew that was going to happen as soon as I put it away. One moment, please. Oh, yes, okay. The question. Measure O. Will funds fix the Pilicetos Bridge, fund the library, or promote new businesses and other projects? And who is responsible for fixing the Pilicetos Bridge?
Well, I feel like I've already answered the Measure O question, so I'd like to address the Pilicetos Creek Coastal Trail Bridge, if that's all right. So, the city was responsible for the design and construction of this bridge. While the city transferred ownership and maintenance responsibility for the bridge to state parks, the fact remains that the bridge serves as a really critical, commute corridor and recreational corridor, not just for tourists, but for residents and school children and such. So while the city might not be a lead agency, as in, responsible for, the financing of maintenance and oversight, I believe the city is a responsible agency because its residents, use this bridge, use the trail, and benefit from it economically. So I would have had the city, over time monitoring the condition of the bridge, even though it's not totally 100% responsible for it, and interacting with state parks about it rather than waiting for a crisis to develop. So I think the message here is don't let, turf issues get in the way of solving problems. Fortunately, the city has come around now and is working with the residents of the parks, and I think that's a really good thing. And I think there are ways to sort of expedite the process, but it requires, real focus and commitment, and it requires the residents to stay involved and let their legislators and city council know, what they need and want. And, $100,000 towards planning for the repair or replacement, is completely to be expected. When you get a grant, you have to have skin in the game. And for many grants, cities and nonprofit organizations have to put up anywhere from 25 to 50% of the match. So, that's okay, and I'm okay with that. If they take it out of the general fund, I think that's quite all right. That's what the general fund is for. It's a flexible pot of money that you can use for emergencies, to take care of routine maintenance, but not special capital projects.
I think the underlying problem here is the lack of maintenance. And as David Wolfe said, the Main Street Bridge, the Pilicetos Creek Bridge, the drainage ditches, there are a host of infrastructure that is just not maintained, and it comes back to bite them, either in the form of bridges that collapse or lawsuits because people are hurt. So we have to do much better with the infrastructure, and that costs money, and we just have to face the fact that that's really important. If we can be creative and get grants, that would be wonderful. I don't have a quick fix for the Pilicetos Creek Bridge. I think, again, that it should be fixed soon for all the reasons that everyone else has said. And if we can be creative in trying to figure out how to get it funded, that would be wonderful. But the underlying problem must be addressed too. Thank you.
Okay, let's change it up a little bit here. And we'll start with Harvey and go back on this. And I would just say that because of the nature of this question, even though we allow 2 minutes, if you really don't want to take your 2 minutes and you can be more succinct, or you don't want to, have an in-depth answer on it, you can talk for less than 2 minutes. You're not required to talk for 2 minutes, just no more than 2 minutes. Okay, so somebody is asking from the audience that there has been talk about moving City Hall. Should Half Moon Bay move City Hall away from downtown?
I don't have any strong feelings. I think it's pretty good where it is now.
I like City Hall exactly where it is now. It should be in the center of town, just like the school is. It creates a sort of, focal point for the community. And certainly, it's, probably the lowest priority in the long list of maintenance and public works needs the city has. So, yeah, they keep it where it is. Works just fine.
I know nothing on the current agenda that's talking about moving the City Hall.
So similar, no current initiatives for moving City Hall. I will look at this again, another project. What's our capacity? Is it sufficient where it is? Do we have room for all our staff? Is it working? If it is, that's great. If it's not, I'm open to doing what's right based on the information.
No. And I believe we did a lot of work at City Hall a few years ago. So,
No, don't move it.
No. And just to touch on one thing very quickly, I actually contacted the White House. I have a close working relationship. And after recalculating Measure O, I realized that in fact Measure O can also defeat ISIS.
Okay, you had your breaths, now it's time to get back to work. We'll start with you, sir, and we're going to make this a two-parter like we did with the other one, since the questions have a little bit of nuance difference. So we'll start with the first one, which is, what is your position on repairing the Main Street Bridge?
Good idea. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah, obviously it needs to be done.
I almost feel that they were asking maybe for a little bit more clarification, because there have been several ways of looking at it, and so I didn't, but if you want to stay with that.
I'm sorry. Okay, so I'll go back. For those of you who aren't aware, I got involved because of the bridge. I was the person who ended up getting it on the register, or the National Register of Historic Places. I worked with Caltrans. Countless people, it's not worth spending 3 hours talking about. Suffice it to say that bridge is going to outlive all of us if we never touch it again. And the stories about spandrel walls flipping off and horses and buggies falling into the gully and all this crap is just meaningless. And so, yeah, fix it. It needs to be fixed. I mean, not fixed as in it's going to fall down, but just like all of us here, me especially, we could use some tender loving care. That's what it needs. That's all it needs. This is a simple question.
Yeah, it needs to be made ADA compliant. I don't know what more to say.
I say no. Because we don't know what's wrong with it. If something's wrong with it, then we repair it. I suggest that we get an engineer to stress test it. And if it comes out, it can be repaired for a reasonable amount of money in time, I would support that. If the engineer comes back and says it needs to be replaced, then we have to replace it. It's a safety issue for me. If, and the engineer is going to have to put his seal on his report and put his reputation and his license on the line. That's where we start. We just start by saying, it'd be nice if we fixed it, or we have a nice new bridge, we find out what's wrong for us. It is my philosophy that we should, if I become elected and we go, I want to leave this city as good as it has been for me, or better for the future generations. So if someone says it can be fixed, and it's fixed for 5 years, we can get 5 more years out of it, that's unacceptable for me. It has to be a fix that's going to last into the future generations. And when we're talking about bridges, we're talking 50 years or more. Whatever engineer says, that's what we should do.
So, before we do anything, we need to finish the testing in the bridge. There is a contract in place, about to be in place to do structural testing for the Main Street Bridge. That will determine, ultimately, factually, if it can be restored. It's not a repair option. It's a restore or replace. If you're not aware, you have arrived recently. There was a pretty major issue mid-year. Replace the bridge versus restore the bridge. And the voters were pretty clear. They want to restore the bridge. So with the voters, I originally supported replace the bridge. We had money in hand to do that. The voters said, no, we don't want you to do that. And so following the lead from voters in the community, I made the motion to adopt Measure F, which was the Citizens Initiative. And Councilmember Elefant seconded that motion. We adopted the vote of the people, and that's our policy for our city. Then what was the other option?
I think the bridge project got a little off track, and we hadn't done the testing. And at the meeting where we were talking about which direction to go, I made a motion to wait till we had testing in hand. There was an awful lot of emotion that night in the room, and I think it was really the wrong time to make a decision, but, you know, we're under the bridge. Now we are going ahead with the testing. We made a motion, and it's approved. We're going to create a Main Street Bridge Advisory Committee. We're going to put 10 people on there, Main Street business owners, engineer, people at large, etc., historian, and have them look at all the facts. And what I'm hoping they'll end up looking at is two simple solutions. One, a rehab, if testing says yes. One, new bridge. What are the cost comparisons? What are the funding the city gets? People say we can get grants. Until you go out there, you don't know for sure what grants are going to be. And second and thirdly, what's the impact on the Main Street businesses? So if a rehab shuts down for 6 months, that's going to be something we have to look at. The new bridge is 3 months. I have throwing these things out there, we don't know yet. That's what the committee is going to come up with. Once the committee brings back a recommendation to us, and hopefully they've also been in communication with some of the people in town. But let's face facts, who gets impacted more than anything else? Work has to happen on that Main Street bridge. It's going to be the people with businesses on Main Street. Once they've done that, bring it back to the council. I think we're going to have something the whole community can support, and we can move on.
So I supported Measure Up to preserve the Main Street Bridge. I do think it's really, really important to have an independent test of the bridge's structure and conditions, but also its life expectancy. I think that's reasonable. It seems to me that if it's not cost effective, we do, as Mr. Presto said, only have 5 years. We have to look at that very closely. But I think unless we can prove without, beyond a reasonable doubt that it can't be fixed at a reasonable cost for a reasonable length of time, that we need to, pursue the voters' will. I'm a little bit concerned that it looks like the engineering firm that was involved in planning for the bridge replacement seems to be in a position to undertake the independent testing of the bridge. I'm not happy with that. I think a fallback position might be to have it peer reviewed if in fact we're not fully trusting the results we get from the independent review by the current engineering firm. But I support Measure Up and will implement it to the best of my ability.
A small correction to what Councilman Alfano said. The Citizens Initiative was not put on the ballot by the City Council. The Citizens Initiative would have occurred in November, and a lot more people would have voted. And the Council, I believe, did not want to see that referendum on the same election as their own election. So, 2/3 of the people in June supported preserving the bridge. Probably at least that many would have voted in 5 weeks to do that. That's a minor point, because the good news is Measure F did pass. I am concerned that the testing will be done by a firm that has no relationship to the existing people who did the initial testing or the initial engineering work. It really needs to be done independently. We need an honest forensic analysis And based on that, we can make some intelligent decisions going forward.
Okay, this is part two of the question, and we'll start at the end of the table again, even though it's been touched upon. But the second part of the question was, what could have been done better concerning the Main Street Bridge issue?
So let's go back. I'm going to answer that question. I'm going sort of both questions at the same time. The first one is, I was at a meeting with the interested parties approximately a month and a half ago. Jerry was there as well. These are parties that are interested in bidding on the city's testing project. The meeting was led by URS Corporation. We have a contract in place with URS Corporation to replace the Main Street Bridge. It was signed 2.5 years ago. That contract is legally proscribed by the measures that the city council eventually adopted. I've asked people at the city why that contract remains in place. I've asked people why URS was leading that meeting. I've asked people why 75% of the attendees at that meeting were there at the invitation of URS. So the others spoke to the biases in the testing process. This is a deep concern to me. I don't know how we get around that because I'm not involved in that particular part of the process, but it is what it is. What was the question? Memory dump.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was the question?
Yeah.
Oh, I did it too again.
The question reads as follows: what could have been done better concerning the Main Street Bridge?
So what should have been done is, instead of coming in and making fantastic projections about walls falling off and earthquakes and everything else and saying, oh, we've got $8 million, let's just fix it and replace it. As with most things in this city, including the library project, instead of identifying what is it we as a community need and want, in other words, in the case of the bridge, what are we dealing with? Is it historically significant? The answer was yes, but they ignored it. Is it physically viable? The answer is yes, but they ignored it. They basically took a report that they paid CSG $10,000 for. CSG came in and said, oh, we need to blow it up. And that was the road they went down. And then this is where the council really got caught out. I don't think they expected the level of resistance they got from the community at large, which for a variety of reasons, financial, practical, legal, historic, all said, wait, we can't do this. And eventually we had to force them to stop. This stopped because of our organization working with Caltrans to bring a halt to the city's environmental process. Let's be very clear about that. Thank you.
Yeah, I was not involved in the Measure E, Measure F debacle, but I think one very good thing came out of it. And that was the citizens stood up and said, no, we're not going to take it anymore. We want it repaired. We don't want it replaced. And their voices were heard. The same thing happened with Pillar Cedar Street Bridge. The citizens stood up and said, okay, we need our bridge. And I think that's the only way we can get anything done in our town. If the citizens are involved. One of the very good things that has happened because of the bridge is that we're beginning to develop a downtown businessmen's association where they can look after their own needs. I think that until we can allow citizens to have a full voice in our process, things won't work.
I'm not sure what the city council's motivation was to do what they did and how they did it. It doesn't matter to me. We're here now. And I'm looking to look what we can do, not what happened before. And I guess the question is, how can it be better? How can we have done it better? I think if you explain to people exactly what you want to do, why is important, I think you get a better response. I think transparency has something to it. Not that I'm not claiming that the city council was not transparent or was trying to hide anything. That's not my point. But maybe they weren't clear enough on what they wanted to accomplish. And I think if you do that with any audience, then you have them. And then you can start disagreeing, but productively, not negatively. That's what I would do differently.
So, what will we do now? I think comes down to pace. that I think ultimately I underestimated the magnitude of the community's interest in the bridge. We had lots of studies. Now, with all due respect, while I respect a guy who has a business in town and whatever he's doing, and he has a strong opinion about the bridge, when we sit in the city council, we're responsible for that asset. We have to rely on the opinions of professional engineers. And so we had three engineering studies that backed up the direction. Ultimately, the community said, we don't care, this is so important to us, we want to restore it, and we need to respect that. And I underestimated, respectfully, the intent and the magnitude of the interest in the bridge. It comes down to pace. Something talking about engaging with the community, most people don't realize, we held many meetings with local merchants in their businesses, in coffee shops, chatting about their interests and their concerns. Our person reached out to an economist at Stanford and one at Berkeley and talked to them about what would the impact be during major construction. We did lots of homework, tons of homework. Ultimately, the community voiced their opinion, and I respect that. That's tough. I think the pace, we slowed the pace and did even more outreach. I will comment that results from that, we're doing a lot more outreach in a lot different ways. Regarding the library, we have input from 2,000 people in our community in the library project. We're going out to the community to get the input rather than having them come to our meetings at the farmers markets, at the schools, right? We're in front of businesses and getting input that way. And that we've learned from, we've grown from that. So that's interesting.
Yeah, like I said earlier, the city worked on this for a couple of years. Engineers said the bridge is in really bad shape. The newspaper had big headlines, bridges really rated very poorly. But the council said, okay, we've got to do something. The direction was replace it, get federal funds. It made sense. We had a lot of meetings, and there weren't a lot of people sitting up here that came to those meetings at that point in time. Later, as things started to come up, the merchant said, well, how long are you going to close the bridge for? At that point, I think that's where the city council should have kind of taken a step back. Said, let's go ahead and do the testing. Let's spend the money. It could be $100,000, whatever. Let's do the best testing we can, find out structurally if it can be rehabbed. And then we can sit down, as I said before, and make that determination, what's the best way to go forward. And as Rick said, we're doing a lot more of this outreach. I know we're in the middle of 10 years. Ours is like 20 years old. We finally have the funds, it's almost $1 million to update our general plan. And one of the people running it, Dante, said, we're going to go into more outreach than less. If we have to go out to farmers market, to Pete's Coffee, to New Leaf, we're going to go out and get outreach. So that's the thing we have to do more of. Library, great outreach, general planning, more of that. We should have done more of that with the bridge, but many times in this life we learn lessons when things go off track.
So what would I have done differently? The city's municipal code for historical structures basically requires the city to do the maintenance and upkeep on the bridge on a regular basis. So some of that clearly has not been happening. I would also have asked questions. I don't believe in, solutions chasing problems, really. You have to know, is there a problem? What is the problem? What does it cost to fix it? What are the alternatives? Who does it impact? What do they think? And that would have been a really simple start. The city might not have spent, almost $500,000 on engineering studies before knowing the actual condition of the bridge. Secondly, there's a misunderstanding about the condition of the bridge. Caltrans has said that the bridge is safe for all loads and to not have load limit signs on the bridge. So there are two measures. There's the health rating of the bridge, and then there's the health rating of the bridge, and then whether or not the bridge meets contemporary standards for roadways. So, the Golden Gate Bridge has a rating of 11 in terms of its, contemporary ability to handle traffic and all that. But it has, and the Half Moon Bay Bridge actually has a healthy rating of 89. So the bridge is actually safe. It just does not meet contemporary, bridge standards. That was confused for the public, and I think confusing for the city as well. So we should have understood that before spending money. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. I see issues, but going forward, as Don said, we need to get an independent test and see where we go.
If I could draw another lesson from this debacle, is that relying on high-priced consultants is always a mistake. Okay? Consultants consult. They make money when you do what they want you to do. You have to have some independent sense of what is fiscally sound, what the community wants, and then you can go out and hire consultants. But I think the mistake that was made here was that the high-priced consultants started this all rolling. They wanted the $8 million, $6 million funding, and so that's how we ended up with this mess. And it's important to not follow that road again and not let the consultants.
Okay, well, in our last discussion, something was mentioned about the general plan, and lo and behold, I see a question concerning the general plan. So I guess that's a good transition line. So let's go with that. We'll start with Harvey and work our way back again down to the end of the table. Now this is a long one, so listen, and I will repeat it upon request.
Well, we're starting.
Okay, here we go. To all candidates, the city is revising the general plan. The stakeholders are developers and realtors. There is a proposal being discussed by GPAC to rezone ag land and open space as R1. Do you favor rezoning ag land and open space as R1 so that it can be developed? And if so, why do you believe that it is in the best interest of the community?
Wow. Let me back up a little bit.
It's 25 words or less.
Yeah. The GPAC is the General Plan Advisory Committee. And as the questioner indicated, the people on it are developers and old people. There are no young people. There are no Latinos. And most seriously, there's no me. I applied to be on the General Plan Advisory Committee, and I was interviewed by the council, and I guess they figured that somebody with a PhD in physics who is devoting his efforts to helping the community is not suitable to be on the General Plan. Okay, fine. So, I don't know if you see my logo, but there's a cypress tree on it, and some of you may recognize it. This is a picture, this comes from a picture my wife took of the lovely cypress tree that used to be our gateway on Highway 92, which a developer chopped down. Then that same developer built a two-story real estate agency as our gateway. Now, I'm not saying that this was illegal, but it's really representative of the direction we can't go in. So to answer the specific question, we need to make sure that our ag lands and our urban development PUDs are not made easier for development. They're the heart of the community. They're the reason people come here, and we just can't allow willy-nilly new housing developments and large shopping centers to use on the coast. We need to keep the coast beautiful.
I'm interested in well-crafted policies and careful planning that protect the halfway big brain, if you will. And that is our small town character, our scenic coastal open spaces, and our downtown Main Street. And at the same time, I'd like to see us blend with that, policies that will allow our economy to grow and thrive. And I think that's a tall order, but I think it can be done, but it needs to be done with a lot of citizen input. We're only a hop, skip, and a jump from Silicon Valley and San Francisco, the capitals of inspiration and innovation, and I don't see why we can't borrow a little of that magic to solve our problems and to employ it right now in the general plan update. I think with careful consideration that we can have both. There's places to still build. You don't need to convert your ag land. In fact, we're going to need more agricultural land probably, as we can't grow food in the Central Valley. And so we grow, what we do is infill, in existing neighborhoods, close to downtown, close to services, and protect those open spaces along the coast that provide a buffer from everything from erosion and sea level rise. So there's places to build and there's places not to build, and I think we need to protect our ground. So that's my mission.
It's interesting that Mr. Rohrbeck paints the 13 volunteers on the General Plan Advisory Committee as all developers. Let me read you the makeup of the committee. 5 residents at large, 2 conservation, sustainability, environmental advocates, 2 real estate professionals and/or developers, 2 business, community, commercial landowners, planning commissioner, rec committee member. Councilmember Patridge and I went through almost 30 applications for the GPAC. And we picked from that, I felt, a really excellent cross-section of citizens in our town that have experience in certain areas and also have a real concern for our community. The GPAC committee is simply a group. We can't all be sitting in this room all put their ideas through with the people that are putting this together. And when that's done, it's going to come back to the community. We're going to hold meetings and talk about what are we looking to do. Are we making changes to zoning? Do we agree, not agree? We're going to have plenty of time for everybody to get involved with this. I know it's not sexy. General plans are just, they're not like the libraries. Libraries are really fun things. General plans are a little bit more boring, but they set the tone, basically, for our next 5 or 10 years in terms of our zoning and our local coastal plan. So if we do a good job, when somebody wants to do something in town and they adhere to the general plan or the local coastal plan, they shouldn't have any issue with doing whatever it is they want to do and not to appeal to the Coastal Commission if they're following our SCP.
The general plan helps articulate the vision for our city. Alan described the committee, the GPAC General Plan Advisory Committee, is balanced, citizens at large, environmental interests, etc., etc. Where are we at with this? We're in ideation mode. We're in information gathering mode. There are no reports, no recommendations made to City Council. There are no proposals made to City Council. This is where the group gets together, and if you have an idea, you should be able to express your idea. We're about diversity of opinions, diversity of input. All of that makes us stronger. When somebody suggests an idea, we shouldn't just throw it away. We need to consider it. We're in the stage of the process with the general plan where all ideas are being considered. When they get held together, formalized, and come to the City Council, then we can have a really rich discussion about, does this make sense for our community? But we are in information gathering and ideation mode. With respect to the General Plan Advisory Committee and the input we're getting, it is a balanced group, balanced group. But there is a noteworthy gap. We sent out surveys to the whole city, and we received very few surveys back in Spanish from the Latino community. This is the vision for our city. It has to include input from the whole community. I'm a co-founder of another organization, Half Bay Latino Advisory Council. Talked to Dante, who was on our staff, and we kicked off a couple of things. First, we provided surveys in Spanish to the Latino community and got dozens and dozens of them back, and that went into the process. Second, we held a general plan meeting at Main Street Park in Spanish. We got lots of great input. We're doing a lot of outreach and a lot of collaboration together.
Okay, let me answer this question. A lot of people think I'm reasonable, that I have been through my life, and competent. And hopefully out of living as long as I have a little bit of wisdom, hopefully. and I'm not going to answer a question in 25 words or less that someone's interpretation of something that doesn't even exist yet. It's something that's in its beginning stages, with all due respect. Until I see it in black and white, until I look at it, it would be unwise for me to comment. I do believe there are places to build and there are places not to build, and I will make the sound decisions if I'm elected.
Yeah. I agree with both what Rick and Don have said. It's a process that's just beginning, but I think it's a great opportunity to involve the citizens. And I think getting the word out and getting more and more people involved in it is going to be all too good. I think it's a chance to help us to grow in terms of moderate income housing, which I think is critical on the coast here. I could commute over the hill. It's a chance to look at our traffic congestion problem, which is really outrageous. It's a chance to really develop our downtown and to encourage businesses to come into our town to increase our tax revenues. So I'm excited about it. I think it's a great opportunity.
I actually think this is a critical subject, and I'm going to answer the question last. And I think it illustrates excuse me, the disconnect between the city council as it currently sits and the people of Half-Moon Bay. And the reason is to go back to the last meeting that was held for the general plan and the city council, when Badia and, I don't remember the second company, but the consultant that's doing the general plan for us presented the findings of what they've got so far to the city council. There were two parts. The first part was 500 user surveys that went out to the community and came back. The second part was 12 stakeholder interviews, and unfortunately Harvey crossed his wires here. This is not the GPAC, this is not the advisory committee. This was who the city council chose to give them feedback to equal to 500 responses. Those 12 members consisted of, all of whom were over 55, 10 men, 9 white, 2 family members who are, by the way, the largest developers in the community, 2 council members, no Latinos. Okay? So that's part one of the equation, is the way they stack the deck is they stack the deck with people who are going to be pro-development. That's not the way we should be doing this. The second thing I'd like to observe is at that meeting, the consultant spoke of the 6 things that those 500 people were interested in. And they were all essentially more trails, more small town, more open space. Not one of them was open up PUDs, public or planning development, open up all these open spaces for development. Not one of them. But what did the council do? And if you go back and watch the video, you'll see it. They spent, these 2 and the other 3 on the council collectively spent 35 minutes not talking for a minute about what was addressed by the people, but addressing solely PUDs and how to unlock them. So this to me is the clarion call for the disconnect between the council and the general public. If you think the council representing the small narrow interests of development are what we want, then you should vote for them because they're doing a fantastic job. I don't think they represent our community. Thank you.
Okay, well, based on the time it takes to answer your question, this will be our last question. And if I didn't get to your question, I apologize. We had more questions than we had time for. This will be the last question. We'll start at the end since you're already the voice. And the question reads as follows. Your thoughts on providing another north-south access road, possibly Foothill Boulevard?
Geez, why doesn't someone throw a hot potato into the mix? Foothill Boulevard was not really a north-south access road. It was a bypass that would run from the Beechwood development essentially over to Route 92. I think we have to have a heart-to-heart discussion as a community and understand that our town ends just over the 92, right? 3/4 of a mile, whatever it is. Our growth is going to be limited by the feeder capability of 92 to provide traffic in and out of our community. And this goes back to a question that was asked earlier. The question was, how can you make traffic better at Pumpkin Festival? Well, we need a little thing. You're not going to. You're not going to put 250,000 people in one day across that road and not have a traffic jam. right? So we kind of got to recalibrate, I think. Either we build a 6-lane highway across the hill, which is not owned by us, or Foothill Boulevard is moot. What's it going to do? All it's going to do is bypass the traffic and stuff it out on 92. So I know it's getting late, I don't want to keep it short, so I'll just say that's a discussion that we have to have long term, is the circulation within our community. We are at capacity now. If we're going to add homes, if we're going to add businesses, commercial, you name it, we have to address first the traffic and what we're going to do with them, and then build them. And thank you very much for coming tonight. Oh, we have closing statements.
Yeah, I don't even know where to begin with Foothill Boulevard. When I lived in Montara, I thought, oh my God, couldn't they just extend it up to Montara where I would have to get on Highway 1 on the weekends? It's a wonderful idea. Whether it works or not, I don't know. I honestly can't see how putting half the people that are on Highway 1 onto Foothill Boulevard and having them all go to 92 is going to help anything. I don't see, it just doesn't make sense to me. Unless you do something about 92. So it's a huge problem.
Where did this question come from? I'm not even sure how physically, I'm not sure it's even possible anymore. We have veterans over there now, got developed over the last few years. I don't know. I don't know if it do anything with traffic. I would probably hire a traffic engineer. It sounds like a cop-out, but it's out of my pay grade. I don't know if we could do any good, and whether we could do it. And I don't see anybody asking for it either, so that's all I would say about it.
One thing we're hearing universally across our community, no matter what circle you run in, is the need for traffic mitigation. It's a problem. It's troublesome for families, it's troublesome for workers, it's troublesome for visitors. It's just not good. Foothill Boulevard was an idea in the past to have another road along 92 to go around the high school and create two paths to the north part of Half Moon Bay. That was meant to feed a new neighborhood that was supposed to go in, as well as reduce traffic. I would support that. I don't think it's a viable project. I think there are wetland issues and zoning issues and map issues that make that not viable. What I would support is looking at traffic overall. There is a county study going on that's about to kick off to look at traffic north of Half Moon Bay and on 92. The city needs to also do a similar study in parallel. I mentioned earlier, they cannot do a study independent of what the city does. It's all chain, it's interconnected. Ideas that have come up are roundabouts, adding lanes, so if you're going to turn off, you can get your lane to turn off, and traffic can keep going. Whatever traffic engineers need to figure out, they need to figure it out. Are we ever going to be a smooth, free-flowing traffic community? Not on a Saturday. But we can, and we should look at options to mitigate things. So Foothill Boulevard is a great idea. I think it's not a viable idea. But traffic mitigation of the coast is something we need to take seriously.
Foothill Boulevard would have been a good idea. Basically, in the evening, people that live north of town could have peeled off on Foothill and gone into the back of their neighborhoods, whether it was Terrace, Grandview, Sea Haven, all the way up to Frenchman's Creek. The previous councils, and I'm just going to say it very clearly, who didn't want growth, killed Foothill Boulevard. Actions they took have made it virtually impossible to ever resurrect Foothill Boulevard. So I agree. I don't think it's ever got something we can even bring back from the dead. I think that's finished. But all that being said, I think we have to still consider, we have to continue to pursue two things. One is we have to improve Highway 1 going north of town. There are huge problems on there at night. Sometimes, you know, it backs up damn near beyond 92 at night. The same way that Highway 92 was improved through town and it opened up the merging, it's really made things way better in the morning. The traffic studies we've done so far, going north from 92 up 1, we can do the same thing. We can expand the left turn lanes, we can bring the merge farther up Highway 1 so that you don't have these huge backups at night. And the other thing is, as a council, we have to keep working with the county and Caltrans and the other agencies that we're part of, traffic congestion and so forth, to eventually fully improve 92 to where we don't have these constant traffic jams. Let me tell you the saddest thing. You guys, you know it better than me because you know when to go and when not to go on 92. Think of all the visitors that want to come from Hayward and San Leandro and wherever. They want to come to the ocean. And they get on Highway 92 on the weekend and they're stuck for an hour or more. That's not fair to them. That's not what the coastal plan is meant to be. So if we improve the highway to get those people here, we owe it to them. I mean, talk about residents. We owe it to the visitors to be able to get to their ocean without being stuck in traffic.
I agree with the previous speakers. It looks like Foothill Boulevard is no longer feasible, so I'm not sure it's even worth talking about. I do think the city needs to look at traffic comprehensively. I've been following this project in San Diego County. It's the widening of Interstate 5 between La Jolla and Oceanside. The road project has been approved to widen it from 10 to 18 lanes. And the environmental impact report says that traffic congestion will be just as bad when the project is done, if not worse, than it is currently. So I think there's some dispute as to whether road widening actually, ends up reducing congestion. What you want to do is reduce congestion. And the state is going to be requiring cities and counties to have plans that reduce what they call vehicle miles traveled. And that means, getting people out of their cars. It means locating development close to city centers, jobs, and services. It means alternative transportation, bike trails, pedestrian amenities, in addition to, intersection efficiencies, synchronizing traffic lights. But it's really an issue that needs to be looked at comprehensively with a variety of solutions. No one solution like widening Highway 1 to 4, 5, 6 lanes is actually going to ultimately solve the problem. That's my opinion on that.
I thought in the 90s we put a stake in the heart of Foothill Boulevard. Apparently it's come back to haunt us. It's absurd to think that road could exist with breakthrough weapons. It would cost maybe $20, $25 million to route it the way it was originally. So as Debbie says, it ain't gonna happen. But I agree with her too that a temporary or somewhat useful solution is to try to get as many cars off the highway as possible. That is a practical solution to improve the traffic. And ideas like more transit, certainly getting school buses back. It's absurd that we don't have school buses because there's traffic congestion even on the weekdays when it's school time. It's nuts. So we need to get more the bus service. We need to have more encouragement of bikes and pedestrians. But I agree with Councilman Kowalczyk that we're going to be stuck with traffic for a long time. I mean, that's the way it is.
Well, before we bid you good night and thank the candidates, we just want to call to your attention the fact, if you didn't get enough, that there's another council candidates forum, which is going to be Monday, sponsored by the radio station at the Ted Adcock Center at 7 o'clock, and you're all invited to that. 7 o'clock Monday night at the Ted Adcock Center. So, anyway, I would like to personally thank everybody.
Voters having a forum in Ted Adcock on the 8th.
Yes, that's correct. And I know that some people said there wasn't enough, and now I think there'll be plenty of opportunities for the public to come out and see all the candidates. So that's what we want. We want as much opportunity as possible because on one night maybe somebody can't come out, that way they can come out on another night. So that's correct. There'll be another one on the 8th. So plenty of time to come out, ask your questions, maybe new questions, get clarification of things maybe that wasn't said fully here tonight. But again, thank you so much for coming out tonight and taking the time to share your platforms and positions with us.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim Henderson.
Wait a minute, where are all the timekeepers?
Hey!
Thanks for looking and keep on taking.
I saw it. I'm going to get already.